The night was unusually dark, the moon hidden behind thick, ominous clouds, as Ben embarked on a solitary drive through a remote countryside. It was a road he had traveled many times before, yet tonight, an eerie sensation enveloped him. The rhythmic hum of the engine seemed to echo like a distant whisper, and the swaying trees created haunting shadows on the road ahead. As he drove deeper into the darkness, Ben couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He glanced at the rearview mirror, but all he saw were the empty, black roads he had left behind. Determined to ignore his growing unease, he turned up the radio, hoping the familiar tunes would comfort him. Just as Ben was beginning to relax, the headlights flickered for a moment before returning to their full glow. He frowned, trying to figure out the cause, but the lights seemed fine afterward. Nevertheless, his nerves continued to prickle, and he kept his eyes on the road with heightened alertness. A sudden figure emerged from the shadows, causing Ben to slam on the brakes. He squinted to get a better look. It was a young woman, seemingly disoriented and terrified. Her clothes were tattered, and her face was streaked with dirt and tears. Ben's heart pounded as he rolled down the window to offer help. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. The woman hesitated for a moment before approaching the car. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Please, I need your help. My car broke down a few miles from here, and I've been walking for hours. Can you give me a ride to the nearest town?" A sense of compassion overwhelmed Ben, and he agreed to help her. She climbed into the passenger seat, and the atmosphere in the car shifted. It felt heavy and unsettling, but Ben tried to push aside his apprehension. As they drove, the woman's behavior became increasingly erratic. She muttered to herself, occasionally glancing at Ben with an unsettling grin. Her words were incoherent, but Ben caught snippets of something about coming back and never leaving. Unease turned to fear as he realized the road he was traveling wasn't leading to the nearest town. Instead, it led deeper into the desolate countryside. He tried to confront the woman about the strange route, but she simply laughed and said, "You'll see soon enough." Terrified, Ben attempted to make a U-turn, but the steering wheel seemed to have a mind of its own. The car continued on its path, and his heart sank. Panic gripped him, and he reached for his phone to call for help, but there was no signal. It was as if they had entered a dead zone. The car eventually came to a stop in front of an old, dilapidated mansion, surrounded by gnarled trees. The woman turned to Ben with a sinister smile. "Welcome home, Ben," she said, using his name with an unsettling familiarity. Confused and frightened, Ben demanded an explanation. The woman's face contorted into something grotesque, and her eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity. "I've been waiting for you," she whispered. "You're not leaving again." Before Ben could react, he felt a sharp pain in his neck. His vision blurred, and the world faded into darkness. When Ben regained consciousness, he found himself bound to a wooden chair in a dimly lit room. The woman stood before him, her sinister grin still intact. Surrounding them were eerie symbols drawn on the walls, seemingly pulsating with an otherworldly glow. Fear consumed Ben, but he couldn't comprehend how he had ended up in this nightmare. The woman seemed to sense his confusion and spoke in a haunting tone. "You don't remember, do you? You abandoned us, Ben, left us to suffer. But I found a way to bring you back, to make you pay for what you've done." As the memories resurfaced, Ben realized that this woman was no stranger. She was his long-lost sister, Rebecca, who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances many years ago. Guilt washed over him as he remembered the arguments and bitterness that led to her leaving their family home. "I never wanted to hurt you, Rebecca. I didn't know where you went or what happened to you. Please, let me go," pleaded Ben, his voice trembling. Rebecca's laughter echoed through the room. "You should have looked for me harder. But now you'll stay with me forever." Her words sent shivers down Ben's spine. He tried to reason with her, to find a way to escape, but she seemed possessed by an inexplicable darkness. As the night wore on, Ben's hope began to fade. He desperately searched for a way to break free from the restraints that bound him, but they held firm. The room seemed to close in on him, and the air grew thicker with a sense of impending doom. Outside, a storm raged, rain pelting against the window panes, and the wind howled like the wails of lost souls. Ben knew he had to act fast. His life depended on it. In a last-ditch attempt to escape, Ben lunged forward, knocking over the chair and breaking free from some of the restraints. He darted towards the door, but Rebecca swiftly blocked his path, her eyes wild and frenzied. "Stay with me, Ben. We can be a family again, just like before," she cried, reaching out to him with a blood-stained hand. In that moment, Ben understood that his sister was beyond reasoning. Fear and sorrow mingled as he realized the extent of her torment and the darkness that had consumed her. With adrenaline surging through his veins, he pushed past her and ran through the mansion, navigating through its labyrinthine halls. The place seemed to twist and turn, changing its layout as if it wanted to keep him trapped forever. As he reached a crumbling staircase, he glimpsed an opportunity. He ascended the stairs 2 at a time, hoping to find an exit. But the staircase seemed endless, and each step felt heavier than the last. Just as despair threatened to consume him, a glimmer of moonlight appeared from above. Ben rushed towards it and finally burst out onto the rooftop. Rain poured down upon him, trenching him to the bone, but he felt an overwhelming sense of relief. He had to keep moving. With every ounce of strength left in him, he descended from the rooftop and flowed into the surrounding forest, away from the nightmare he had endured. For hours, Ben ran through the dark woods, never looking back. When the sun finally rose, he stumbled upon a small road where a passing car stopped to help him. He recounted his harrowing tale to the concerned driver, who immediately called the police. They searched the mansion but found no trace of Rebecca or any evidence of the nightmarish ordeal Ben had experienced. In the following days, Ben struggled to come to terms with the events that had unfolded. He felt an indescribable mix of guilt, grief, and relief. The memory of that terrifying night haunted him, but he vowed to honor his sister's memory in a different way. Years later, Ben founded a support group for families affected by mental illness, aiming to help others before it was too late. He knew that the night drive had changed him forever, but he was determined to turn that darkness into a guiding light for others. Edison sat behind the wheel of his old, weather-beaten car, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. The rain was pouring heavily, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up. He was on a remote road that cut through the dense, eerie forest, far away from civilization. It was the dead of the night, and he couldn't see beyond the reach of his headlights. The only company he had was the unsettling sound of raindrops tapping on the car's roof. Edison's heart raced, and a chill crawled up his spine. He had taken this night drive on a whim, to clear his mind and escape the pressures of his everyday life. However, what started as a relaxing escapade had turned into a harrowing journey through the unknown. He glanced at his phone, only to find no signal, further deepening his sense of isolation. As he continued driving, he noticed a faint light flickering in the distance. Intrigued and hoping for some assistance, he followed the light, hoping it might lead him to a nearby house or a gas station. The road became even narrower, the tall trees almost blocking out the sky, and the light was the only guide in this darkness. Finally, the flickering light revealed a small cabin nestled in the woods. Relief washed over Edison, and he parked his car outside the cabin. He hesitated for a moment, wondering if he should seek help from the unknown occupants, but the incessant rain and the feeling of dread urged him to take shelter, even if it meant intruding. He knocked on the door, and after a long pause, it creaked open, revealing a middle-aged man with a stern expression. The man's piercing eyes locked with Edison's, and for a moment, neither spoke a word. Finally, Edison introduced himself and explained his predicament, asking for a place to wait out the storm. The man's face softened, and he gestured for Edison to enter. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was heavy with an unsettling silence. The man introduced himself as Henry, and Edison noticed a hint of sadness in his voice as he spoke about the cabin and its history. It was a family heirloom, passed down through generations, each with their own stories of tragedy and mystery. Feeling grateful for the shelter, Edison tried to engage Henry in conversation to distract himself from the eerie ambience. He soon discovered that Henry had lost his wife and child in a tragic accident years ago, and the cabin served as a solemn reminder of his loss. Edison felt a deep sense of sympathy, but the story only added to the unsettling aura of the place. Hours passed, and the storm showed no sign of abating. Edison decided it was time to leave, thanking Henry for his hospitality. However, as he stepped outside, he noticed something strange. His car was no longer parked where he had left it. Panic surged through him, and he rushed back inside to inform Henry about the missing vehicle. Henry's face turned grim, and he explained that the forest was notorious for its inexplicable occurrences. Many had reported losing their way or experiencing inexplicable phenomena while passing through it. Edison's heart sank as he realized the gravity of his situation. They both stepped outside, and Henry offered to help look for the car. The rain had now reduced to a drizzle, but the darkness was impenetrable. They ventured into the forest, calling out for the lost vehicle. Each step felt like an eternity, and Edison couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. Every rustle of leaves, every distant sound, sent shivers down his spine. As they walked further, the faint light of the cabin grew dimmer, and Edison's hope waned. Suddenly, they heard a distant cry, and Henry's eyes widened with terror. He urged Edison to run back to the cabin, warning him not to look back no matter what he heard. Confused and frightened, Edison obeyed, his heart pounding in his chest. Running through the dark forest, Edison could hear the sound of his own breath, quick and desperate. The cries grew louder, and he resisted the urge to turn around, following Henry's warning. The chilling thought that something was chasing him gripped his mind, pushing him to move faster. Finally, he reached the cabin, gasping for breath. He shut the door behind him, barricading it as best he could. Panic consumed him as he wondered what had happened to Henry and what was lurking outside in the darkness. He was trapped, alone, with no way to escape. Time seemed to slow down as he waited in the darkness, the only sound being his own heartbeat. Minutes turned into what felt like hours, and he finally dared to approach the window cautiously. The rain had ceased, and the moonlight illuminated the surroundings. To his horror, Edison saw the car parked not far from the cabin. The headlights were still on, and the interior light was flickering eerily. The sight filled him with dread. He couldn't understand how the car had returned when he had not heard or seen anyone driving it. Suddenly, a chilling realization dawned on him. He was not alone in the cabin. There in the dim light stood a spectral figure, its face obscured by shadows. It exuded an aura of sorrow and despair, and Edison could feel its presence weighing heavily on his soul. Fear immobilized him as he stared at the ghostly figure, unable to look away. The ghost seemed to beckon him, and despite his terror, he found himself drawn to it. The sadness in its eyes tugged at his heartstrings, and he felt a deep connection, as if it wanted to communicate something. Without thinking, he reached out his hand, and the ghost's hand emerged from the shadows to meet his. It felt ice-cold, sending a shockwave through his body. In that moment, he could feel the pain and anguish the ghost carried, as if it were reliving its own tragic tale. Images flashed before Edison's eyes: a car accident, a family of 3, and a tragedy that had occurred long ago on this very road. The ghostly figure was that of Henry's wife, forever trapped in this world due to the unresolved sorrow of her untimely death. Edison's heart sank as he realized that he was in the midst of a haunting, the story of which had been passed down through generations. The stormy night had triggered the ghostly apparition, and his inadvertent connection to it had led him to its source. Overwhelmed with compassion, he made a silent promise to help Henry's wife find peace. He knew that for the ghost to move on, The truth behind her tragic fate had to be revealed. However, he also knew that it would not be easy. The spirit of Henry's wife was trapped, unable to leave the confines of this forest, and the dark forces surrounding her were responsible for the disappearance of his car and the chilling cries that echoed through the woods. Edison's determination to uncover the truth overpowered his fear. He spent the night researching the history of the forest, its myths, and its dark past. The more he delved into the eerie tales, the clearer it became that he was up against something far more sinister than he had ever imagined. As dawn approached, he set out on a mission to confront the malevolent forces, determined to lay the ghost to rest and find his way back home. Armed with the knowledge he had gathered, he ventured deeper into the forest, hoping to uncover the truth and release the trapped spirit. Through perilous encounters and daunting challenges, Edison persevered, following the trail of clues left behind by the ghost and those who had encountered the darkness before him. The forest seemed to come alive, testing his resolve at every turn. In his search for answers, he met a reclusive hermit who revealed the forest's dark secret. Centuries ago, the forest had been a place of rituals and sacrifices, with the souls of the departed trapped in a sinister nexus between worlds. It was here that the spirits sought redemption, and only an act of genuine compassion could set them free. With newfound knowledge and strength, Edison faced the malevolent forces head-on. He confronted the dark entities that thrived on despair and grief, determined to break the cycle of sorrow and free Henry's wife. As the final confrontation unfolded, the ghostly figure of Henry's wife appeared before him again. This time, her eyes were filled not only with sadness, but also with a glimmer of hope. Edison could sense her gratitude as he began to unravel the truth and offer solace to her tormented soul. In a moment of pure compassion and understanding, Edison revealed the truth about her untimely death, acknowledging her pain and loss. As he did, a blinding light enveloped her, and the dark forces surrounding her began to recede. With a final, mournful wail, the ghost of Henry's wife faded away, finally finding peace after centuries of suffering. The forest, once filled with dread and despair, now felt serene and tranquil. As the sun began to rise, Edison made his way back to the cabin. He found his car parked where he had left it, untouched by the night's events. The storm had passed, and the forest seemed to have returned to its ordinary state.